Hey, folks, welcome to the show. Hey, Sharad. Winter is coming. That's what I hear these days.
There's a slight tilt early mornings, which I really like. And man, it's been a long summer. So I can't wait for the weather to turn.
Yes, before the smoke catches up. I hope not. But we are in NCR, so one smoke-related comment is warranted when we are talking about winters, right? And we have with us a very interesting guest today. I think a sector or a space which we have not covered at all. And one of my favorite business profiles in terms of cash flow generation and recurring revenues, kind of stuff that we like. Yes, Sharad, your affiliation to cash flow generation is very well known on the show, and so that way it's a good fit today. We have with us Anuj Rajain, CEO of Soteria. Soteria is into the domain of what we call integrated facilities management. It's a significantly large service provider when it comes to domains of integrated security, remote monitoring, video surveillance, uh, and with a wide variety of industry applications. Anuj, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hi, Nikhil. Hi, Shraddha. Thank you so much. Doing well. I'm also seeing the winter come through quite fast. I'm expecting my second child in the month of November. So yeah, the smog is something that I'm also quite looking forward towards how to manage that.
Congratulations on that.
But pleasure to be here to speaking to both of you.
Pleasure's all ours, Anuj. We'd like to start a bit with your personal journey. You kind of you've dabbled a bit in financial services early in your career. We saw that you were part of DB, Avendus. Then you did a stint at Soteria pre MBA. Then you went to Yale. You came back, and from we just want to understand how come from financial services to remote monitoring and surveillance. How did that part of the world strike you?
Yeah, it's a quite a stark difference because dealing with financial services or financial products to developing something different in terms of services space, very very different, a stark difference. But I think what happened was I went for my bachelor's in US. I think this was 2012, 2013 when I was getting done, and I was seeing what were the opportunities I would have post my bachelor's. And I studied finance and economics, so seemed as if that was my keen interest or focus area. I moved back, or I came back to visit my family, and at that time, India was in the early stages of the boom that we talk about today, and it seemed as if being in India would be more fruitful or growth oriented for me rather than staying in US, which was a fairly mature economy, limited opportunities. So I was home. I was talking to my brother that I'm trying to figure out what I want to do next. And one thing he suggested was, why don't you just do something of your own? Now, the background is I did have a family business, which my father started back in 95. So I'm not technically a first gen entrepreneur. I was trying to align my objectives with what my family business was in, which was in security services and facility management.
Right.
So doing something related to that as an extension seemed like a logical step to do.
Got it.
I think that was also the time when certain things related to surveillance were cropping up. So just to do a recap, back in 2012, 2013, that is when probably there were a couple of theft or robbery cases that happened for various banks and their ATMs. And the most notorious one, which triggered my thought towards this direction, was where an aged woman in Bangalore was trying to withdraw cash from an ATM,
right,
and was stabbed multiple times. And unfortunately, we didn't have any way to identify it, stop it, or deter it, or even detect it.
right.
So that is where my thought process started to kick in, that we have a huge amount of CCTV or surveillance infrastructure,
Hmm.
which is not being really put into use, or even if it's being put into use, it's in a very rudimentary way, where a place which has a command center, 50, 100 people sitting looking at screens.
Right.
So you can't really be effective in that kind of a scenario. So I thought there definitely could be a way to automate it.
Got it.
And that's probably where the journey started.
Yeah.
Since I'm a finance guy, I could crunch numbers, so that part became a little easier than normal.
Yeah. And how does if we were to ask you, like Soteria, we understand sort of integrated business services platform, but this is a key line item, right? Surveillance is obviously a big piece of it, like you alluded to. But what other pieces fit into this, and how are they sort of connected? Because when you sort of go through the website or go through the sort of business description, there are some pieces which I can understand the synergies between them, because a person looking for A probably also wants B, C, D, and E. But how are they sort of from a technological standpoint integrated or connected with each other?
Sure. So, like you said, surveillance or CCTV is the largest chunk of what we do, because that's the largest, I think, demand in the market right now. Sure. So we migrated from the traditional, let's say, automated surveillance to something that we thought would be more relevant to our clients. So I, as a security or a facility management service provider, go to my client, and typically the people I end up interacting with are either the admin heads or the CFOs or the HR heads. And traditionally, they would be discussing various bottlenecks in their system. As an example, we work with a fairly large gold loan business, and the challenge that they used to face was the gold loan transactions that they had within each customer was taking too long.
Mm-hmm.
So we said, hey, we have infrastructure in place that can actually track and monitor how long each step of that transaction took. And let's see what the bottlenecks are. And since we have the data, we can do it at a larger level and then give you more actionable inputs as to how or what is the roadblock in your SOP of doing a transaction and how we can optimize it.
Right.
So that client went from doing a 21 minute per transaction to something like, I think it's 9 or 10 minutes now.
Right.
So that's a stark improvement in their overall operational delivery.
Yeah.
And that again ends up improving the customer satisfaction that they end up having.
And this is a 100% digital solution to lower that turnaround time?
Absolutely. So I think the problem statement was identified by the client.
Yeah.
The data was collated by the infrastructure we had already put in place. And then we've obviously put in additional measures to automate that process to ensure that it's a more of a technology-driven process rather than a human intervention process.
So, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, when you said, like, if you look at this example in particular, I mean, when you're looking at like disbursement of gold loan, there's like a physical commodity which is involved there at substage, right? Effectively, and obviously you have these digital gold loan companies also which do service at home when it comes to disbursing gold loans, right? So there's some amount of transportation of that physical commodity involved, which requires obviously security and tracking and surveillance. And I'm sure there are some there are IoT related applications that someone like you could bridge in. Is that like a classic use case where there is some object of value being moved from point A to point B, where you guys often go beyond the conventional CCTV plus surveillance framework?
I would say majority of the time, let's say probably 8 or 9 out of 10 times that is the case.
Right.
Okay.
Because we have to understand and appreciate the fact that we are treated like a cost center up until 5 years ago.
Right.
So the only way we can transition from being a cost head for a company to more of an ROI driver is by showcasing that there is a value chain that might be impacted due to poor service delivery. And how can we help you ensure that there are lesser challenges in that route?
Interesting. And in the beginning of the show, you had mentioned that when you kind of joined the business, you saw that it's primarily like there's obviously a traditional security angle to it, which obviously gravitated towards hardware interventions, but still in a traditional realm. And that's the perception that often one has, that usually there's a central command center, there are thousands of people just viewing screens, and it is not really the most efficient way in which surveillance and tracking can be done. And you had mentioned that we obviously wanted to automate that. When you say automate, how does that actually manifest from a product standpoint in your case?
Correct. So that's absolutely right. So there were two pieces of areas where we're trying to automate. One is the backend, which is the command center. How to run it more in a more lean fashion, in a more effective fashion. And the second was the actual manpower, human resource on the ground. How could we optimize that? So I'll treat the command center bit first. That's the easier answer. Well, up until 2015, 2016, majority of the CCTV surveillance done in India was done through the traditional route of having an in-house command center. So if you were, let's say, a large bank, you would put an in-house command center to track your activities. If you were a large manufacturing facility, the same thing would happen for you there. The same thing still happens at the majority of the airports in India.
Right.
Now, one, it is a very expensive or a capital intensive affair to set up that command center. Secondly, you need to have people run it 24/7 and you need to constantly upgrade the infrastructure there. So the first piece we tried to address was to convert this entire industry into a SaaS model.
Right.
Where we have set up a command center. Now that command center can be used by any number of clients.
Got it.
So the overall cost heads that would land up on each company's books now get spread across multiple entities. So they don't really feel the pinch that much.
Got it.
The second piece that we thought was more effective to address, especially for us, was how to do the work more effectively, more efficiently. And that is where we started thinking of migrating towards the mindset that we are not going to do a real-time monitoring. We'll do something which is called an automated and an alert-based monitoring. So at any given time, if nothing is happening at an ATM location or a branch or a facility, we are not monitoring anything at all. Our command center is actually being not utilized at that point.
Right.
It only comes into play when there is an alert triggered. Now, that alert can be a false positive or it can be an actual event happening. But the point ends up being that you end up saving a lot in terms of resource utilization, in terms of data utilization, if you are actually running an AI on it, saying that only if certain things are happening or triggered, only then we're going to do it.
Right.
And that also helped us get a migration from a reactive activity to a more proactive activity.
Right.
So now the data is not used for post-mortem purposes by, let's say, the police department or the RBI or the fire department, but we are proactive in terms of taking actions right when an event is occurring.
And when you sort of meet prospective clients, right, Anuj, like how do you feel like their appetite is for, because there is some infrastructural outlay that is sort of front up, right? I mean, is that something that often comes up? And like you rightly said, right, to articulate to a client of converting essentially a cost base into an ROI driver, you have to highlight the leakages and you have to sort of justify it against payback periods and all those things. So how does that conversation typically flow? And is there a sort of financing element or an OPEX? Like, when we talk about solar panels and they operate on a CapEx and OPEX model, is there something similar that you guys also do in sort of helping companies like that?
Absolutely. I think you've touched a really interesting point. I think when we meet a client, the first leg is not figuring out their appetite, if they have the budget to invest in technology. If you were to ask me this question back in 2018, 2019, it was more about educating the client that there's something other than manpower related services.
Yeah.
So the tech adoption, even though India is really high on tech development for the world, but the tech adoption rate in India was really laggard. We were not keen to onboard technology for our own businesses. I believe 2019, 2020, that transition has happened. One is also because of COVID, because when people were not able to go to a location to work, that is where technology ended up being a huge support. Uh, but if we talk about the appetite of a client, predominantly majority of our clients do have large balance sheets to support doing a capital procurement and deployment. But we've rarely seen that to be the case in terms of our services. So predominantly, they either go for an OPEX model like we would have in the solar, or they go for a hybrid model where they say that certain essential chunks of hardware that need to be deployed, we'll pay for it. But predominantly, anything that is needed to run your show, you put it and you charge us a monthly value for your services, for your assets.
So, like, when it manifests, is it like a right way to characterize, say, when it comes to, say, cameras, motion sensors, etc., those kind of things usually kind of sit on the books of the clients, and when it comes to like running the command center, that is more of a rental model. Is that how
I would take it? I would differentiate a bit more. So something like cameras and sensors. I think 70% of our clients have outsourced that piece to us as well. So that's also sitting on our books.
All right.
For the reasoning being that we typically have a contract period of 5 years.
Right.
Now, no camera or a sensor would have a life per 5 years. They typically hover between 2 to 3 years.
So there's a replacement cost, which they prefer you might as well look at rather than them, right?
Absolutely. So the elements that they keep on their books are probably the a panel box, which might be the nerve center for the location.
Right.
The hard drives, which is technically their data.
Got it.
These are the elements that typically they prefer to have with them on their books rather than with us.
So, I mean, I would assume like the data, is it like, it's usually like some sort of a decentralized physical server which is created for the client, or there is a integration with the cloud? How does it exactly work?
So, fortunately or unfortunately, India has been in a scenario where if you talk about a banking industry, cloud is not the preferred choice.
Got it.
Because the data needs to rest in India. So in cases as such, even if I were to talk about banking or BFSI, the data movement outside of their own system or their own servers or network is a really challenging affair. Right. So what we've done is that the data technically rests at their servers.
Right.
We create a virtual pipe between their locations and our command center.
Right.
And since we only view the data when an alert is triggered, only the data logs rest at our end.
Right. Interesting.
And when you talk about other services like facilities management, which are soft services, which have a little bit more manual intervention, if you will, how does one approach that? Is that sort of do you piggyback on your own network of professionals who are operating in the space? Is it sort of just adding a digital layer on already the kind of work they're doing? How do you sort of approach that?
So the simple answer in this is a man will always need data, and the data would always need man. So that relationship would always exist. I don't feel in near future India would be in a scenario where we would say that the robots are cleaning places, or there's a robot that is acting as a guard outside a location. So that is something that I don't feel is something that's going to happen in short term to midterm, for a simple fact because robots are expensive.
Yeah.
And the cost of resources in India is more affordable at this point. But what I would say in the current scenario, what has been happening is that there, up until now, since we are migrating from an input-based manpower or human resource-based business to a more output-based scenario, that is where digitization has been a really important pillar. Because in order to make that transition, you need data, you need ways to track the efficiency of the people on the ground, on the activities that they're doing. You need to track if there's a physical asset that needs to be maintained. is it at the juncture where it might be better to prevent or fix it right now, or would you rather do it 6 months down the line or 2 months down the line? So that's where digitization has ended up being a really important factor. So
Makes sense.
So we have clients that state to us that one very specific case, that I have a huge warehouses across India. Can you help me provide technology to track the people working for me in that warehouse, their efficiency levels? How often do they need to take breaks? Is the area hygiene for their workspace adequate enough? So these are the elements that are being more prevalent at the current time.
Right. Interesting. And are these sort of requests coming from guys who already have a service and they want to replace it with something superior or something more digital first, or are they first timers into sort of embracing something like this?
I would say they're more of the people who already had services, but they're getting a push from their management or their board to move towards the direction where they would rather have some level of technology in play.
Yeah.
Obviously, the moment you give them certain level of technological transformations, it definitely trickles down and says, what more, what next?
Yes. And it makes sense, right? For them, it's sort of an asset light endeavor, considering a lot of the upfront are sitting on your books. They just sort of, it's a subscription based fee that they're paying. And that's very interesting. And I mean, the business seems to be like, I mean, it's a very interesting profile, right? I mean, there is a subscription-based revenue, it's recurring, it's cash flow generating, and macro tailwinds are there. I mean, security is not something that is going downhill. I mean, people are becoming more and more conscious and want to increase their efficiencies. How do you sort of see the growth profile in not just the profile, but strategy-wise? Is it sort of embedding more services to sort of create like a complete 360-degree service centered around a typical customer, or is it more like, I've covered this geography, let me expand geographically and just offer what I'm doing better at and keep collecting data points and just figuring out what solutions I can offer better? How do you sort of think of that? Because that I would also suspect there's a level of R&D that might go into actually figuring that out. So how do you sort of think about that?
And just to add to what Sharad said, I mean, because one kind of very obvious compliment that one can think of is your focus naturally right now is more on the security and the surveillance part. But when it comes to the underlying technology, even things like geospatial surveys, error detection, equipment failure, industries like oil and gas, those are natural, I would say, offshoots of what you are doing at Soteria. So are those also areas you want to touch, or the pie that you have is large enough and there is enough, I would say, geographical or penetration upside there?
Very interesting point there. So the one thing that I've personally felt is learning should be constant. If you stop learning, if you stop innovating, you'll reach a fairly stagnant space. So for us, while I would say traditionally growing geographically is more important, because there is actually enough meat on the table for us to be happy about.
Right.
We are in an industry where the very limited players, because there's a very high barrier for entry. It's easier for us to grab new clients, grow geographically. But the fact ends up being, if I have already onboarded a client within one set of services, it'll be easier for me to sell an add-on service to that client.
Got it.
My client acquisition cost goes down in that way. I already have a client that is keen accepting for changes. It's very rare that you onboard a client in a very fluid, very simple way. When the client says, hey, I want technology, I give technology, and that's the end of the story. So if you've already got a client where they're convinced on the story that technology is the future, is the logical next step, that becomes simpler. So for me, as of now, the core focus area has been have a fairly good growth rate geographically, but more focus to be put on the different set of technological services I can offer or mount on top of my existing platform.
What would be those typical cross sells be? I mean, what would be those use cases?
So one example that you were actually quoting when you were mentioning it, I said, "Wow, perfect segue for me." Uh, we are working with an oil and gas company in India where they have huge pipelines, and the unfortunate part of those pipelines is that they're in rural areas,
Right.
where the chances of damage of the pipelines for various reasons, for pilferage, for just disruption of the flow, is quite frequent. You will be surprised how they track that right now.
Right.
And very, very rudimentary, very old school.
Right.
So for us to convince them that there was a logical movement forward by probably using drones
Mm-hmm.
to do that kind of tracking, ended up making more sense.
Got it.
So since they were already quite frustrated with what was happening, it was easy for us to convince them to at least allow us to pilot it for them.
Right.
And I believe the moment someone gets the taste of the service delivery, it's as long as they have the money, it's really an easy sell. If they don't have the money, then obviously it becomes a different conversation.
Right.
But oil and gas is a rich sector, so they can.
And there's a clear correlation here, right, in terms of losses. So I mean, there is it's right within their core.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same thing has been quite common of late for me, at least in the last couple of months, with the solar energy market.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know much about how solar panels operate and how efficient or inefficient they are. But I was meeting someone and they told me the biggest challenge that they have is one part of the panel. If one frame gets defunct, it impacts the delivery of the entire panel.
And they need to be cleaned very regularly.
They need to be cleaned. They need to be cleaned regularly. And as much as we would say Rajasthan gets so much of sunlight, it gets so much of dust also.
Yeah.
So that ended up being a very interesting conversation where we said, how do you do it right now? And how can we help you do it more?
But it's very interesting. Like, these are not your typical use cases, right? These are fairly bespoke situations which will need to be scoped out. So how do you kind of become like an EPC partner there? I mean, there must be use cases where probably, like, for example, when you look at drones, right? I mean, drones are not a core of the hardware that you would be putting in your main business, right? That's a specific requirement that you'll have for a particular counterparty. So there, are you do you provide like end-to-end consulting? You kind of procure the hardware, you install it, and you obviously have the back-end infrastructure to integrate it from the standpoint of surveillance and monitoring. I'm just interested in the BD here. What's the cycle?
So obviously the conversion cycle is very long, but we do end up being the end-to-end consultants when it comes to such space.
Right.
And as luck would have it, we have a backing of our parent organization, which is almost 30 years old.
Right.
So they themselves have been diversifying into various services that they can offer.
Right.
So one thing that worked in our favor was that our sister concern trains drone pilots.
Right.
Okay. So we already have a bench strength of pilots who need employment. Procurement of drones is something that we obviously work with partners. We don't manufacture drones, but we procure them. But the technology or the AI algorithm that runs on that drone to do that activity is ours.
Right.
So at the end of the day, we're just mounting more things to connect the entire ecosystem together.
You mentioned
for a sort of business like this, another feature that becomes very important is after sales support or customer support. How do you sort of what is the sort of view that you have, sort of an in-house smallish call center kind of a play to it, or is it sort of more digitized and sort of more chatbot driven? How do you view that?
It's a mix of both, Sharat. So I spend a lot of time in Singapore as well. I believe Singapore is a good bubble to test technologies. Very expensive manpower or human resource, and very proactive government to support technology adoption. And one thing that I learned there's a very large bank in Singapore that I bank with, and they've completely moved away with physical customer service. with the footprint that they have, I'm surprised they end up only having like 20 or 30 locations in entire Singapore. That's about it. They used chatbots in a very big way. They used more on online on internet banking in a very big way. But the day you have an issue is the day you end up getting a taste that, as much as you would be really happy to not have a face to interact with, when there's an issue, that's the only way to get out of it.
Yeah.
So in that's been the case that I ended up using in India as well for a set of services. So we do have a call center or a contact center to handle certain level of customer escalations or customer challenges that they may be going through. But the front ending of that has been with tech again. So typically we realize that out of 100 problems, probably 30 to 40 of them can actually be handled by just having a tech play where you just suggest your problem and the tech front face tells you that, have you tried this step? Have you tried this step? Have you tried this step?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
If none of them work, let's connect you to a real person. Let's make you talk to someone who can now help you out.
No, Anuj. I was wondering. I had like a two-part question, right? One, the first part is on the technology front. Like we did briefly speak about things like IoT, about AI. We keep on seeing there is a fair amount of application when it comes to face recognition through artificial intelligence. It has kind of become a big part of surveillance, but the issue is obviously there is a counter concern about data privacy there. And often the way AI driven face recognition has worked mostly in totalitarian regimes, and it's often government backed. So I'm just wondering, like, how do you kind of is that something that you also end up deploying with the certain set of your clients? Obviously, it's ring fenced and it's for private parties, so it's a different example all throughout. That was one point that I wanted to hear your thoughts about. And secondly, just kind of big picture, 30,000 feet, if you look at your own business, which are the sectors which kind of form a lion's share of your revenues? Is it mostly like financial services, where things like cash logistics kind of play a major role, where there are expensive premium commodities which are being moved, where generally there is a heavy duty bent towards security and surveillance? Or is it also areas like we keep on hearing horror stories now in the US where large retailers are shutting down stores because there is so much instances of theft and safety? Are you seeing that as well? Or it's things like corporate offices. I just want to kind of, because I think a company like yours is a very, and the revenue that you make and the split of that revenue is a very good reflection of the dynamic of security and surveillance in the country, right? So yeah, would love to hear a few thoughts on that.
India, up until a couple of years ago, our data privacy or protection laws were very relaxed. Obviously, in the current government, they have put substantial efforts to make it more stringent. And I believe the current one is probably more stringent than what I would see in Singapore or even in UK.
Interesting.
But I believe in majority of the cases when we use such technologies, more prevalently FR or AI, we are in a controlled space.
Right.
So if I am deploying it for a manufacturing facility, the people I am tracking are typically the employees who are working in manufacturing facility. So we already have a pre-signed approval by them, by their employer to use that information.
Got it.
And secondly, we are only using that information for their purposes. Our AI piece on the back end does collate the data in terms of improving the efficiency, but we don't store any data at our end. We don't want it to be a case where tomorrow we come under a scrutiny or surveillance that why are you storing data that you should not have had. So that makes running AI or facial recognition more simpler for us, I believe.
Right.
Because
it's always ring fenced. There is a very specific use case. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'll not be able to deploy it for traffic control. because in that case, I don't have any abilities or jurisdiction to do that.
Right.
And there are people from whom I don't have consent to use their data.
Got it.
But the more important part that ends up playing these days, again on this, is in the last couple of years, words like AI, words like machine learning have ended up becoming buzzwords, especially for board meetings of a senior management connect. No one realizes the cost behind it. It's very good to have AI, but it comes at a cost.
Right.
So what we've tried to work around in this case is how to create a more sustainable and affordable AI to run for our clients. Because we know the client appetite or the amount of money, the budget that they have for this spend is fairly limited. How can we best utilize that spend? Now, one thing that ends up playing for us is that since we are servicing multiple locations, multiple clients, multiple people, we have a lot of data that has allowed us the overall cost of development or enhancements to come fairly low.
Right.
So one additional update does not cost us much.
Right.
And that we end up trickling it down to our clients. But at the end of the day, we want to capture a larger volume rather than get only high ticket clients. If you were to
Sorry.
I was now going to talk about the industry space or the sectors that we believe are quite promising.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So yes, banking and BFSI is always the low-hanging fruit. The most structured, regulated sector. So it's easier to convince them, easier to have them on board. And if I were to say about 50% of my entire business is banking and BFSI.
Right.
Ends up being a very large and a very well-paying sector. But in the last 2 to 3 years, I believe the certain areas that have had more promising factors, manufacturing in a big way.
Mm-hmm.
We were very slow in terms of tech adoption in any case in manufacturing. So now large industries sectors are appreciating how they can use this to further improve their output.
Right.
Warehousing, e-commerce, very big play for the last I would say 3 to 4 years.
Right.
Our e-commerce sector has been booming, especially during COVID. That was probably one sector that never shut down.
Mm-hmm.
It was still in a very fast-paced growth environment, and that helped us testing new services and platforms with them, and that has been a very good growth story for us. And the third thing is retail. That's exactly what I would say. We were trying to avoid what has been happening in US.
Right.
I mean, I remember when I used to stay in US, theft was a really serious thing.
Yeah.
And big box stores used to have physical security to deter such activities.
Right.
Unfortunately, our friends in US decided that having people on board to monitor such activities was a redundant activity, so they removed it, and that's probably one of the reasons why.
Oh, really?
It's becoming more of a
That's how
challenge
it has
right
panned
now.
out. Interesting.
Yeah. So I was in US in 2021, 22, and I remember visiting some of the stores that were close to Yale. Right. And I saw how there used to be people outside screening who was coming in and out. Those desks, those jobs have gone. They've disappeared.
Interesting.
And a store employee to jeopardize their own life to do such an activity when they're not trained for such activities.
Right.
So in that case, technology is the logical segue right now. It is probably the easier fix in the current state in US. And if you were to talk about India never really faced that challenge as such. If you were to go to a Reliance supermarket or a Chroma, you will still see someone standing outside, even if they're not doing any relevant activity. Just the psychological impact that there's someone screening the people going in and out puts adequate fear in someone who's trying to steal something or in that way make a trouble at the store.
Right.
Now, what we're trying to do is add technology as an additional layer there.
Right.
So there could be cases where,
and I guess big box retail in India has just started picking up, right? I mean, with the advent of dark stores, with the advent of larger organized retail coming into the country, that use case is only going to expand.
Absolutely, and that's the area where we feel we'll have a relevant impact and a good growth trajectory, not just for us but our entire industry, because technology is needed to track, to monitor, to enhance the current SOPs that they're running. We are doing some dark stores right now, and I must tell you, they're really dark times.
Right.
It can be quite challenging to monitor and stop pilferage. Yeah.
Interesting.
Very pilferage is a really big thing.
I have a kind of another follow-up question, and you may choose to ignore it if you want. Aren't you working closely with the government as well? I mean, is that a domain that you haven't touched, or have you chosen not to? Because there's obviously a natural fit there. I mean, government obviously is a totally different type of a client base, but yeah.
So yes, government is I think a completely different animal. We traditionally have not done much of government work.
Okay.
We have done work with entities that are probably a government and a private partnership.
Right.
Like an airport, like a metro service, like an oil and gas project. Traditionally, because one, the conversion time for a government client was lengthier and more cost consuming than that of a private sector client, and the payment terms of the government tenders were just way complex.
Right.
It just take too long to get your money for the efforts and the assets that you've deployed. Right. And being in a capital intensive industry, I'd rather have a recurring and a smooth paymaster than the one that will pay me in 6 months.
Right. No, it's very refreshing because
working capital cycles, and government is not really known to do wonders to your working capital cycles, so it makes sense from a cash flow management standpoint.
No, I mean, to be fair, I mean, Soteria in that case, I mean, for me is more of an exception rather than the rule, because, one would always think when it comes to security surveillance, there's a lot of government risk in the revenue book, but you managed to kind of steer away from there. So, no, that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, we saw two of our competitors getting burnt really bad.
Yeah.
We thought better not to touch an industry where short-term profits will overpower or long-term loss will overpower short-term gains.
Right.
Very, very interesting business, and obviously there's, like you said, right, you can constantly sort of up your game and constantly learn and add more digitization, add more entities into the bouquet. And like when you talk about like BFSI, e-commerce, retail, manufacturing, where like they all have nuances to it, right? It's not a one solution fits all. Some have actual physical. BFSI, there's no physical product.
Absolutely, each sector is specific with their needs, with their demands, with would give them. And typically, what I have noticed is, I mean, if I get one BFSI client, getting the second or the third one is far easier. But the first one is obviously the trickier one.
Yeah.
The place where we've tried to say is that let's get one client in a space, let's service that client for 6 months, let's understand what the challenges are, let's try to mitigate and develop our platform to a level that we can service them better, and then start having a higher penetration in that sector.
It becomes a sort of blueprint or a template of sorts, right? Once you sort of do first one.
Absolutely, yeah.
One final question, Anuj, and obviously, for you guys, it's slightly different because you're part of a larger parent organization, and from a balance sheet strength point of view, this might not be applicable. But how are you viewing capital, like in the future? I mean, this sounds like a classic, private equity play at some stage from the standpoint of increasing institutional capital. Is that something that's on the cards for you in the short to medium term, or the idea is that you kind of have internal resources and there's free cash flow generation? So yeah, that's not a bridge you want to cross right now.
Well, Nikhil, I mean, the answer here is quite easy. More capital always helps, because that obviously helps us having a faster growth. the biggest obstacle for us, like I said, in our market is capital. So I can only have so much of free cash flow to support my existing growth.
Right.
So as an example, last 2 to 3 years, we've been growing 60% plus year over year.
Right.
Our internal cash generations can only support it to a certain level. So
Right.
we did end up reaching out to do a fundraise. Now, one philosophy that I think that it came in from my family as an entrepreneur: keep your equity close till the time you don't reach a certain scale.
Yeah.
So that's what we also ended up doing. That till the time we don't reach a certain skill, certain valuation, why dilute your equity? Why get a institutional investor on board? So far, what we've done to support this growth story is the debt way.
Right. Non-dilutive.
Luckily,
Right.
no dilution. So luckily, the debt for us, even though we thought it might be an expensive debt to onboard, but since we have hard asset to treat as a collateral, so to certain level, our growth is being able to support, or those assets are being able to support our growth.
Yeah.
But if you were to talk about having an exponential growth, where if I've reached a certain skill and I need to take that next level jump, I don't think it can happen without some level of dilution or some level of institutional investor coming on board to help us take it to the next level.
It's interesting because, asset heavy businesses and ops heavy businesses like 2.5-3 years back in the venture world would have been an absolute taboo. But the funding winter, which has kind of crept in within the Indian ecosystem, has made everyone realize, the value of cash flow generation and having an asset base, which obviously unlocks non-dilutive capital levers, and the fact that how operationally intensive businesses also have an inherent moat within them. So no, I think it was a pleasure to hear of your journey and how Soteria has scaled up to date, and wish you larger and bigger milestones in the future. It was a very fascinating chat. Thanks for your time, Anuj. And with that, it's Nikhil Arora and with me, Shahid Tupran, signing off.